The family at the heart of this haunting story came from a quiet suburban town, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and life moved with a gentle rhythm. They were not wealthy, nor were they troubled. They were a family like so many others, defined by small rituals and shared dreams. The father was a steady provider, working long hours but always making time for his children. The mother balanced her days between work and caring for the home, nurturing a household where warmth and laughter seemed to flow naturally. Their 2 children, bright-eyed and curious about the world, filled the home with energy. Together they painted a picture of normalcy that friends and relatives often described as wholesome, even idyllic. Photographs captured their essence, smiles frozen against the backdrop of birthday cakes, summer outings, and holiday gatherings. There was no hint of the tragedy that would later define their memory, only the innocence of ordinary life. Friends remembered them as devoted, always together, rarely missing school events or family barbecues. When news spread that they were planning a road trip into Death Valley, it seemed to many like just another adventure for a close-knit family who loved traveling together. They packed up their car with careful intention, mapping out routes, preparing snacks, even sharing excited plans with neighbors who waved them off. The trip was meant to be a brief escape, a chance to experience the striking landscapes of the desert, to marvel at the wide skies and natural silence. For them, it was about creating new memories in a place they had never explored, adding another layer to the family's scrapbook of experiences. No one could have predicted that this seemingly ordinary decision, a road trip like countless others, would mark the beginning of a mystery that would endure for years. To those who knew them, the shock of their disappearance was more than the loss of 4 individuals. It was the shattering of a picture of everyday life, a reminder that even the most ordinary families can find themselves swallowed by extraordinary and unforgiving circumstances. Death Valley has always carried with it an air of warning, a land where beauty disguises danger. It is the hottest, driest, and lowest national park in the United States, a place where summer temperatures can climb past 120 degrees, where rocky ridges shimmer with heat mirages, and stretches of salt flats appear endless to the human eye. Tourists often come to marvel at its surreal landscapes, but rangers know its other side, the unforgiving toll it takes on those unprepared for its extremes. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. It swallows them whole, leaving behind silence and unanswered questions. For the family, the trip into this unforgiving landscape was planned with excitement rather than fear. They packed their modest vehicle with the usual road trip essentials: coolers filled with water and snacks, folded maps, a camera bag for capturing memories, and the quiet optimism that comes with exploring somewhere new. The father had carefully checked the car days earlier, ensuring the tires and fluids were ready for the long drive. Departure came early one morning, the sun barely rising over their neighborhood as they waved goodbye to relatives and neighbors. To them, it was simply a holiday on wheels, another adventure in the scrapbook of their family life. Along their route, the family made a few casual stops that would later become critical points in the timeline. At a small gas station near the park's entrance, the clerk recalled seeing them. They seemed cheerful, buying drinks and topping off the tank, the children laughing as their parents carried snacks to the car. Hours later, at a roadside motel on the desert's edge, staff remembered them checking in for the night. The image was always the same, an ordinary family, relaxed, giving no sign of what lay ahead. These would be the last confirmed sightings. And yet, as investigators later pieced together the timeline, subtle warning signs emerged. The soaring temperatures, the vast stretches of unmarked roads, the reliance on paper maps instead of digital navigation, and the tendency of tourists to underestimate just how brutal the valley could be. At the time, no one could see the storm gathering beneath the surface of that seemingly routine road trip. A journey meant for joy had unknowingly steered into the furnace, where one wrong turn could mean never returning at all. The vanishing itself unfolded quietly, without any single moment of alarm to mark its beginning. After their night at the roadside motel, the family set out toward the park, intending to drive through the more scenic backroads before looping around to a main highway. Relatives expected a phone call later that evening, just a quick check-in to say they had arrived safely at their next stop. That call never came. At first, it seemed like a minor oversight, perhaps poor reception in the desert, or simply fatigue from traveling. But when hours stretched into a full day, concern began to spread. By the second day, relatives grew anxious. They called the motel where the family had stayed, but staff confirmed they had checked out on schedule. None of their known friends or relatives had heard from them since. With no credit card activity, no phone calls, and no new sightings, the silence deepened into dread. Reports were filed with local authorities, and what began as worry quickly escalated into the grim realization that something was very wrong. Search and rescue operations were launched immediately. Rangers coordinated with county sheriffs, helicopters swept across the open desert, and thermal imaging scans combed for signs of heat signatures that might indicate survivors. Search teams on foot scoured canyons, washes, and dry riverbeds, leaving flags to mark areas covered. Vehicles drove dusty backroads for days, hoping to spot the family's car from the air or ground. Despite these efforts, nothing surfaced. No broken-down vehicle, no tire tracks etched into sand, no dropped belongings to suggest where they had gone. The desert offered only silence, stretching endlessly with its deceptive sameness. Each search pass ended the same way, empty-handed, with the oppressive heat wearing down the volunteers and rangers alike. The family had vanished so completely it was as though the desert itself had decided to erase every trace of them. What began as a hopeful rescue mission quickly hardened into something darker, the first signs of a mystery that would linger far longer than anyone could have imagined. The disappearance of the family did not remain a quiet local matter for long. Within days, news outlets across the region seized on the story, broadcasting photographs of the smiling parents and their 2 children, urging anyone with information to come forward. The case spread quickly, picking up national attention as journalists emphasized the haunting irony of an entire family vanishing inside one of the most famous and well-traveled national parks in the country. To viewers at home, it was chilling. If a family could disappear without a trace in such a vast but public place, perhaps anyone could. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Vigils were held in the family's hometown, friends clutched candles and framed photos, while neighbors gave tearful interviews about their kindness and warmth. Online, theories began multiplying, with strangers poring over maps of Death Valley, speculating on message boards about what might have gone wrong. Some believed the family had simply gotten lost in the network of unmarked backroads, their car running out of fuel or breaking down in the heat. Others leaned toward darker explanations, suggesting foul play, hijacking, or even an orchestrated disappearance staged to start a new life elsewhere. The uncertainty left endless room for imagination. Locals around the park added their own layer of speculation. Some whispered of ghost towns tucked into the desert, abandoned mining camps that drew in the curious and never let them go. Others suggested cartel activity in the remote borderlands, claiming the family may have crossed paths with people moving drugs through the desert's hidden routes. And there were those who believed it was a case of survival gone tragically wrong. Perhaps the family wandered too far from their vehicle seeking water, only to be overcome by the sun. For investigators, these swirling theories only added to the frustration. Every tip called and required time and resources, and many turned out to be little more than rumors. Leads fizzled quickly. A reported sighting at a roadside diner led nowhere. A supposed clue about abandoned luggage turned out to be unrelated. With each passing week, hope dimmed. The family's image plastered on newspapers and nightly news broadcasts became not a call for rescue but a reminder of the case's stagnation. What stung the most for those on the ground was how a mystery so public, so widely known, could yield so little evidence. Theories kept the story alive, but the desert itself refused to give up its secrets. Death Valley is a landscape that defies comprehension, a place where beauty and menace coexist in equal measure. By day, the horizon wavers with heat mirages, tricking the eyes into seeing water where none exists. The ground itself is an ocean of salt flats, blindingly white under the sun, stretching so far that scale becomes meaningless. In the distance, ridges rise like jagged teeth, painted in hues of red and gold that glow in the evening light. But behind this grandeur lies danger at every step, temperatures that can melt resolve within minutes, and an expanse so vast that the human figure disappears into insignificance. Scattered across the valley are reminders of those who came before and never left. Abandoned mines, the desert, rusted machinery sinking into the sand, silent monuments to lives cut short in pursuit of fortune. Rangers often warn that wandering too close to these relics can mean disaster, as shafts and tunnels collapse without warning. Yet the real threat comes not from what is seen, but from the emptiness itself. In Death Valley, once a person strays from the beaten path, the desert begins its work of concealment. Tire tracks vanish overnight under shifting winds, footprints blur into sand, and the relentless sun erases every trace of what once was. Rangers who joined the search for the missing family spoke candidly about this cruel reality. They explained how even helicopters, circling for hours with thermal cameras, often find nothing. The desert's rocky terrain holds heat long after the sun goes down, masking human signatures. Crevices, canyons, and dry washes can hide a vehicle completely, making discovery almost impossible unless one stumbles directly upon it. Survivors of close calls added their voices too. Hikers recalled how just a wrong turn on an unmarked trail nearly cost them their lives, with dehydration setting in faster than expected. A couple described abandoning their car after it broke down, only to collapse within miles of a highway, saved by sheer luck when rangers found them. These stories underscore a simple truth: Death Valley does not offer second chances. For those searching for the vanished family, the hopelessness grew with every passing day. Surrounded by silence and an endless horizon, the desert seemed less like a landscape and more like a living force determined to hold its secrets forever. Months slipped by, and with them the urgency of the search began to fade. What had once dominated headlines gradually shrank to smaller mentions, until the story disappeared altogether from nightly broadcasts. The public, once captivated by the haunting mystery of a family lost in the desert, turned its attention elsewhere. For investigators, the lack of new leads became suffocating. Every path had been explored, every tip exhausted. Without fresh evidence, the case stalled, suspended in a silence as vast as the desert itself. In the family's hometown, the absence was felt with a weight that did not lessen. Their house remained, frozen in time, with its curtains drawn and lawn kept neat by neighbors who refused to let it fall into neglect. Each anniversary of their disappearance brought quiet vigils, where candles flickered in the night and photographs of smiling faces were held close by those who remembered better days. Relatives spoke about them in the present tense for as long as they could, clinging to the faint possibility of a miracle, before grief and exhaustion forced the acceptance that no answers were coming. The silence of a cold case carries its own kind of torment. Without closure, every possibility remains alive, each one darker than the last. Were they lost in the backroads, struggling for survival in their final moments? Or had something more sinister taken place, hidden by the desert's indifference? No one could say. What was left behind were memories, the laughter in family videos, the warmth of holiday gatherings, the simple rituals of everyday life. These fragments of their existence became the only evidence that remained. As the months turned into years, the case settled into that limbo familiar to so many unsolved disappearances. The desert had taken them, and in the absence of new discoveries, hope became as fragile and fleeting as a mirage on the horizon. For those left behind, the silence grew heavier with time, an unanswered question that lingered with every passing season. 6 years after the family's disappearance, the case had long since faded into the background of public memory. What remained was little more than a whisper among locals and a painful wound for those who had known them. Then, on a sweltering summer afternoon, 2 hikers exploring a remote wash in Death Valley stumbled across something that broke the silence wide open. At first, it looked like nothing more than a faint outline in the sand, a curve of metal poking through the dust. But as they drew closer, the shape of a vehicle began to emerge, half buried by years of wind and shifting earth. The hikers approached cautiously, brushing away layers of grit from its surface. The paint, once bright, was sun-bleached and cracked, its windows coated in a thick film of dust. The vehicle sat in a shallow depression, hidden so completely from view that one could have walked within yards of it and never noticed. Its tires were deflated, rubber decayed by the relentless desert heat. What struck the hikers most was the eerie silence surrounding it, the unsettling sense that time had deliberately swallowed this machine whole. Realizing the magnitude of their discovery, the hikers contacted authorities. Within hours, rangers and deputies secured the site, pushing back curious onlookers and setting up a perimeter. Forensic specialists arrived with cameras, brushes, and sealed evidence bags. They moved carefully, documenting every inch of the vehicle before attempting to open it. Years of desert exposure had warped its frame, making every movement delicate, every door resistant to touch. The scene carried an undeniable weight. Investigators knew instantly this was no ordinary abandoned car. Its location matched suspicions long held but never proven. The missing family's story, dormant for 6 long years, had resurfaced with chilling clarity. As the forensic team prepared to peer inside, the desert held its breath. The question hung heavy in the air: would the vehicle reveal the answers that had eluded searchers for so long, or would it only deepen a mystery that had already consumed so many? The moment stretched, suspended on the edge of revelation, as investigators readied themselves to look within. When investigators finally forced the doors of the abandoned vehicle open, a rush of stale, suffocating air escaped, carrying with it the scent of heat-baked upholstery and decay. What lay inside was a scene frozen in time, the final snapshot of a journey that had never reached its end. The once shiny paint had been stripped of its color, dulled to a pale, ghostly hue under years of sun exposure. The windshield bore a long, jagged crack stretching diagonally across the glass, as though the desert itself had marked it. Sand had blown through the gaps, coating the seats in a thin, powdery film. Inside, personal belongings told the quiet story of the family's last days. Folded maps, creased and sun-stained, were scattered across the passenger seat, routes traced in ink that had faded almost to nothing. A child's jacket lay crumpled near the floor, its fabric stiff with dust. On the back seat sat a small plastic toy, discolored by heat yet unmistakably familiar, a chilling reminder of innocence carried into a place that offered no mercy. A pair of sunglasses still rested in the cup holder, and in the glove box, searchers found receipts and travel brochures from the days before the family disappeared. Forensic specialists moved methodically, careful not to disturb what time had already claimed. Swabs were taken from surfaces, fingerprints lifted from glass and metal, and DNA samples collected from clothing fibers. Each piece of evidence was logged with painstaking care, sealed in bags that crackled under the weight of significance. The vehicle, once thought lost forever, had become a time capsule, offering the first tangible link back to the family in 6 years. It did not take long for testing to confirm what investigators had suspected. The DNA pulled from the items inside matched the missing family. Fingerprints aligned perfectly with records taken from their home years earlier. There was no doubt now, this was their vehicle, their journey, their final trace. The discovery reignited a case many believed was gone cold forever. Families at home, long accustomed to silence, were jolted by the news, forced to relive the pain they had carried for years. For investigators, the find was both breakthrough and burden. They had recovered the family's car, but the most pressing question remained unanswered. The vehicle offered echoes of their presence, but not the fate that had befallen them. Somewhere in the desert, the truth still lingered, waiting to be uncovered. Not far from the vehicle, search teams began to notice signs that the desert had concealed for years. 100 yards from the shallow wash, beneath a ridge of sunburnt rock, fragments of bone emerged from the sand. At first, the discovery was small, an isolated piece half buried in dust, but as investigators widened their search, more evidence surfaced. Scattered remains, bleached by relentless sunlight, lay dispersed across the ground. It became clear that the vehicle was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a final, desperate struggle for survival. The placement of the remains painted a picture that investigators knew all too well from other desert tragedies. A trail of belongings told the sequence of their last hours. A worn shoe found half buried, a torn shirt caught in a cluster of brush, a cracked water bottle with only traces of sand inside. Each object spoke of movement away from the car, of an attempt to reach safety in a landscape that offered none. Items left behind suggested panic and exhaustion, a family shedding what they could not carry in the blistering heat. Experts concluded there were no signs of foul play. No evidence of violence, no indicators that another party had been involved. Instead, everything pointed toward dehydration and disorientation, the cruel partnership that claims so many in Death Valley. In extreme heat, the body weakens quickly, confusion sets in, judgment falters, and distances become distorted by shimmering horizons. It is easy to believe salvation lies just over the next rise, only to collapse short of any hope of rescue. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to the missing family. The confirmation was devastating, even if expected. Investigators pieced together a likely scenario. When their vehicle failed, they chose to set out on foot, carrying what they could, hoping to find a road, water, or help. But the desert offered nothing but silence. One by one, they succumbed, their belongings dropped in quiet surrender to the elements. The discovery was heartbreaking not just for its confirmation of death, but for what it revealed about their final hours. The scattered trail of possessions stood as a haunting record of desperation, of a family's fight against a merciless landscape that had no intention of letting them go. Reconstructing the family's final days was a task that weighed heavily on investigators and experts alike. From the position of the vehicle and the scattered remains, a likely sequence of events began to emerge. The car, trapped in a remote wash, had either broken down or become stuck, leaving the family stranded in one of the harshest climates on Earth. With dwindling supplies and no immediate way out, they faced a choice no traveler ever wants to make: stay with the vehicle and hope for rescue, or set out into the desert in search of water and help. Evidence suggested they chose the latter, leaving behind a trail that spoke of desperation and exhaustion. Experts in desert survival explained how quickly such decisions can turn fatal. In the searing heat of Death Valley, dehydration can set in within hours. As water loss accelerates, the body begins to fail, impairing judgment and distorting perception. Victims often experience confusion, dizziness, and even hallucinations, chasing mirages of water that shimmer on the horizon but vanish with every step forward. Heat stroke follows swiftly, shutting down organs as the brain struggles to function in rising internal temperatures. Death by environment, as rangers call it, is not slow, it is mercilessly fast. Survivors of near-identical ordeals added chilling context. One hiker recalled how a wrong turn left him wandering for hours without water. By the time rescuers found him, his skin was blistered, his mind fractured by hallucinations. Another described collapsing within sight of a highway, only narrowly saved because a passing car stopped at the right moment. Their stories echoed what investigators believed had happened here: a family convinced that help was within reach, only to be betrayed by the scale of the desert. The scattered belongings told the rest. A child's toy dropped along the path, a half-empty bottle abandoned when it became too heavy to carry, clothes shed to lighten their load. These were not random traces, but markers of a final, agonizing march under the unforgiving sun. In piecing together those last hours, what emerged was not a story of negligence or recklessness, but of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. They had fought against the desert with every ounce of will, but in Death Valley, willpower is rarely enough. The land itself became their undoing. Even with the discoveries that seemed to explain the family's tragic fate, questions continued to linger, unsettled and unsettling. The most pressing of these centered on the vehicle itself. Why had it been found so far off-road, hidden in a wash miles from the main highway? Rangers often advised travelers to stick to marked routes, yet the family's car had ended up in a place even seasoned searchers rarely ventured. For many, this detail alone invited speculation. Some pointed to the possibility of GPS errors. In the mid-2000s, navigation technology was far less reliable than today, with desert roads often mislabeled or entirely missing from maps. Travelers could be guided toward dead ends, unmarked dirt tracks, or phantom roads that existed only as glitches on a screen. Others suggested that misleading signs, common in remote stretches, could have drawn the family off their planned route, convincing them they were headed toward safety when in reality they were driving deeper into isolation. Still, skeptics argue that the explanation was incomplete. Even with navigation errors, could a family really vanish so completely without leaving clearer signs of distress? Some theorized foul play might still have been involved. Perhaps they encountered the wrong person in the wrong place, or stumbled upon something hidden in the desert that was never meant to be seen. The discovery of remains and belongings pointed toward natural causes, but the absence of absolute certainty kept conspiracy alive. In a story with so many silences, imagination filled the void. Forensic analysis leaned heavily toward the simplest answer: environmental death brought on by heat, dehydration, and disorientation. Yet despite the evidence, the mystery retained its grip. The desert had provided fragments of truth but never the full picture. To this day, the unanswered questions ensure the case remains more than just a tragedy. It is a reminder of how thin the line can be between the ordinary and the unexplainable, and how in places like Death Valley, certainty is as fleeting as the mirages that dance on its horizon. For the relatives who had endured 6 long years of silence, the discovery of the vehicle and remains brought a complicated kind of closure. On one hand, the answers ended the torment of not knowing, the endless cycle of imagining what might have happened. On the other, the stark reality of the family's final moments reopened wounds that had never truly healed. Vigils that once carried a fragile hope for survival became memorials, framed not by the question of where they were but by the certainty of what they had faced. Friends described the grief as sharper than before, no longer dulled by uncertainty. "It hurts in a different way," one family member admitted, "because now we know how much they must have suffered." The case became a touchstone for the community, a story retold not for its mystery alone but for the human cost it represented. Photographs of the family, once splashed across missing posters, were now displayed at gatherings honoring their memory. Their story became a warning carried forward, a reminder to every traveler and tourist that Death Valley's beauty conceals a merciless edge. Rangers frequently invoked the tragedy in safety talks, urging visitors to prepare carefully and respect the desert's unforgiving nature. For locals, the family was not remembered simply as victims but as a symbol of the valley's dual identity. They were ordinary people, drawn by curiosity and the promise of adventure, undone by a place that demands reverence. Their disappearance, and eventual discovery, underscored the reality that even in a modern age of technology and navigation tools, nature retains the power to overwhelm and erase. As years passed, the story retained its echo. Documentaries revisited it, hikers retold it around campfires, and those who lived nearby carried it like a scar etched into the desert's history. What remained most haunting was not just the tragedy itself, but the silence it left behind. The image of a family car, sun-faded and half-buried, lingered as a testament to how quickly the familiar can vanish in the face of the unforgiving. In the desert's silence, some stories are never fully told.